Well, good afternoon, everyone. Happy Wednesday. Thank you for joining us today. You could have been anywhere else, but you decided to join our final noontime knowledge of our spring series. And so today you're in for a wonderful learning experience. So we have some great experts who will talk about social workers working with LGBTQIA community. And so I know that you will learn a lot. And again, thank you so much for supporting the School of Social Work's events and Noontime Knowledge. And so if you would just keep your cameras on mute if you do not want to be recorded, and we ask that you continue to keep your microphone on mute. And so about the 12:45 hour, we'll have a Q&A. If you have any questions, please use the chat feature to drop your questions. And you can ask questions throughout the series, but we ask that you use your chat feature to drop your questions. And so now I will turn it over to Charlie Brinkley, who will get us started with today's series. Charlie.
Hello all, my name is Charlie Brinkley and I use they, them, and theirs pronouns. I'm a senior BSW student and the president of the Social Work Association for Cultural Awareness, a student organization that emphasizes diverse causes of social justice from the social work perspective. I'm also honored to serve our School of Social Work's diversity community as a student representative. In light of recent events from Harvard legislature targeting the LGBTQ community, particularly transgender youth, to expressions of homophobia that have recently impacted our campus here at the University of Alabama, I believe it's more important than ever to stand with and advocate for the LGBTQIA community as social workers. Our professional ethics are rooted in self-determination, the dignity and worth of all people, and social justice. And because of these ethical principles, we have a professional responsibility to advocate for our LGBTQIA clients, as well as our colleagues and community members. It's my hope that the conversations and questions from this panel will help facilitate the deeper understanding that's necessary for us to serve as influential allies and impactful advocates for such a vulnerable community. All that being said, I would like to introduce the event's moderator, Rebecca Buitendijk. Rebecca is an MSW student with her concentration in children, adolescents, and families. She is currently interning at the Magic City Acceptance Center in Birmingham and aspires to eventually play a part in opening a resource center for LGBTQIA youth and families in Tuscaloosa. Rebecca, I'll be passing the baton to you now.
Thank you, Charlie. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists. So today we have Chandler Caldwell, Bethany Jones, and Dr. Emma Kay. So Chandler Caldwell is an experienced clinical social worker specializing in mental health, social work education, psychotherapy, care management, and crisis intervention. He's particularly interested in working with adults and older adults struggling with mental illness, caregiver distress, LGBTQ issues, and chronic or terminal illnesses. In addition, Chandler serves as an adjunct faculty instructor at the University of Alabama and the University of Alabama at Birmingham. He has experience teaching undergraduate, graduate, campus, online, and hybrid courses. Bethany Jones, whose pronouns are she, they, is a licensed master social worker in Knoxville, Tennessee, where they have served in the field of social work for over 9 years in a variety of areas, including community mental health, foster care, and hospice home care. They currently serve as a clinical therapist in a private practice that specializes in work with the LGBTQIA population. Bethany received her bachelor's degree in social work from the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. Following graduation, immediately attended graduate school at the Ohio State University, where she obtained her master's degree in social work. Bethany serves as a mentor in 2 separate community programs that aim to guide and support upcoming social workers within her community. Bethany is also affiliated with several organizations that include Zeta Phi Beta Sorority, Coalition of Black Social Workers, and Alpha Chi Epsilon Sigma Social Work Sorority. Bethany is certified outcare health provider, immigration court hearing assessor, and an accelerated resolution therapy trauma therapist in the state. Bethany is currently working on completion of her clinical licensure and a legal studies degree while continuing to make strides within the field of social work to improve the lives of her clients and others she served. And for the record, they're working on my roof here, so I really apologize if y'all could hear that. Dr. Emma Kay is our last panelist. Pronouns are she, they, is the director of the Magic City Research Institute in Birmingham, Alabama. Dr. Kay graduated from the University of Alabama in 2018 with a PhD in social work, after which she attended the University of Michigan as a postdoctoral fellow to further hone her research skills. She has authored nearly 30 peer-reviewed journal articles, serves on the editorial board of AIDS and Behavior, and is the co-chair of BAO's Community Advisor Board. Dr. Kay is MPI along with Dr. Mary Hawk on RO1 investigating the harm reduction on health outcomes of people with HIV who use drugs. She is a co-investigator on 2 additional RO1's CHAMPs, a randomized trial of community health worker and intervention for persons living with HIV in 2 high priority settings, and harnessing the power of social network to improve retention and care and viral suppression among young Black men in Chicago and Alabama. As well as co-PI on study funded by UAB Lister Hills Center's pilot grants for health policy research with Dr. Tina Kempen-Reuter to improve health equity for LGBTQ adults living in Alabama. Dr. Kay's research focuses on LGBTQ and HIV health with the ultimate goal of improving health equity of these populations. So thank you to all of our panelists for being here today. Recognizing that you all have limited time here with us today, I'll go ahead and jump into the questions if that's all right with everybody. So the first question, and I'd like to hear from all of the panelists on this one. Could you describe your experience working with LGBTQ folks? And Bethany, if you want to go first.
Sure. So currently, my work with the LGBTQIA community involves being in a private practice. And so doing that mental health aspect, working with our community from a variety of issues that can be related to their LGBTQ identity and then not. So that's been the bulk of my work, is in this private practice setting that I'm a part of.
Thanks. Emma, with Dr. Kay, would you like to go next?
Sure. So, most of my interaction is in a research setting. I would say most recently, I've had interaction via focus groups with LGBTQ folks, specifically through a needs assessment related to healthcare access and outcomes among LGBTQ folks in Alabama. That's the pilot study that you mentioned in my bio with Dr. Tina Reuter. That's just one current study I have going on, but really all of my research touches on LGBTQ health, both with people with HIV and people without HIV or at risk for HIV. I don't have direct practice experience with LGBTQ folks like some of the others in the group, but I am happy to bring my research perspective in this panel.
Thank you. And Chandler, if you want to go ahead and talk about your experience working with LGBTQ folks.
Yeah, sure. So most of my experience in social work has been in mental health. I started off working with adolescents and youth in Tennessee, and I've done outpatient work, inpatient work, residential work. But most recently, I was in a group private practice where I worked a lot with the LGBTQ community, particularly trans youth, and that is, really what kind of, inspired me to, really focus on that population in my career. So, yeah.
Thank you so much. So what are some issues that LGBTQ people face that social workers should be attuned to? Anyone can go first.
I can start. That's a big question. I think there's a lot of issues that are impacting the LGBTQ community. As Charlie had mentioned kind of in the introduction, I would definitely say some legal issues. There's been a lot of legislation that has been passed recently that is anti-LGBTQ. And that's causing a lot of issues, specifically with the clients I see, because they come in very worried about how this impacts them. What does this law mean? And so definitely any legislative issues. So being aware of that. Access to medical care is also another one that I see very frequently. So there's a lot of gatekeeping that happens. There's a lot of roundabout to even get started on hormones if that's a way that somebody wants to start their journey and transitioning. So there's a lot of difficulties accessing affirming care. And so those would be maybe two big ones that I would point out. And then I'll just add in violence. There's a lot of hate crimes that have been happening, particularly in Tennessee. So we're down south. So there's a lot of hate crimes that have happened and that I've had clients who have been victims of. So.
Yeah, and from a mental health perspective, things that I have really seen and helped, folks with are just general lack of acceptance, especially from family members. A real big one is religious trauma, which there's not a whole lot of research on that. But there's I don't think people really realize just how traumatic that can be for someone in the LGBTQ community. Especially in the South when you're, typically running, you're rejected by the church, and how impactful that can be. And there's a lot of depression, substance use, suicides, ideation, sometimes attempts, we're at a much higher rate of attempting suicide than, other populations. The list just kind of goes on and on. I wish we had, time to talk about them all.
So Bethany and Jeffrey did a really great job addressing this question, so I won't spend too much time adding my piece, but as someone who works at a healthcare organization and who focuses a lot on healthcare, in my research, it's staggering to me just how many people who come to BAO's Magic City Wellness Center, which is an LGBTQ primary care facility, how many of those people have had truly horrific experiences in the healthcare system. I mean, we're talking about outright discrimination or refusal of services, and in some cases, of course, microaggressions are very common as well. A lot of dead naming and misgendering for trans and gender diverse folks, to the point where, we've seen people who have avoided all types of healthcare, which of course is associated with pretty negative health outcomes. So healthcare access, not only access, but access to high quality services is really important. And unfortunately, there aren't as many good places to go here in Alabama. But yeah, healthcare, that's a huge one. And of course, we're a state who has an expanded Medicaid, which makes things even more inaccessible for folks. So that's what I would add.
And I'll add in real quick for our youth as well. I think I'm seeing a lot of my youth who are impacted by school policies, as well as kind of along the same lines of what Chandler had mentioned. There's the religious aspect, but there's also having a lot of parents who are just totally not with it. And that's creating a lot of issues in the youth that I work with.
Thank you all so much. Those are all really important issues to be aware of for social workers. So the next question is, how can we build an atmosphere of inclusion regardless of our personal or religious views? And I'd love to hear from Bethany, then Chandler, then Dr. K, if that's all right.
So I would say for this, really doing your own research really on the LGBTQ community, and then either getting mentorship or training. I think that goes a long way in maybe raising an awareness on our own personal biases or things like that. So I would definitely say getting some training or some mentorship, and really being respectful. I mean, we're all humans. I mean, and ultimately, when we have people come to us wanting to access care, remembering that we are social workers and our role is to really help the clients that we serve, and to kind of let that be at the forefront, and not necessarily maybe our personal or religious views that we have. And if you happen to get a client who is LGBTQ and that for whatever reason is against your belief system, I would just say refer out, because we never want to do additional harm to our clients.
Well, and kind of piggybacking off of Bethany, you know, at the end of the day, we are all humans. And, you know, I say that quite a bit, you know, no matter who you are, where you come from, you know, at the end of the day, we are all humans. And as social workers, we need to, you know, understand that we're all humans, and while also noting the difficulties that minority populations have, like the LGBTQ plus community. But, you know, if it's against your belief system, you know, I would really encourage people to reflect on where that comes from. Is it a lack of knowledge? Is it a lack of exposure? Is it something that you were taught or something you learned growing up? You know, where does that really come from? And if you really want to, you know, provide that, you know, atmosphere of inclusion, it really takes a lot of self, you know, reflection and introspection, and just trying to determine where those, you know, I guess beliefs come from, and how to open your heart. But at the end of the day, you know, we're all humans, and I think we should all be treated with respect and dignity, and that's an ethical duty of social workers. So.
Did you all want me to go?
If you have anything to add, that would be great. If not, we can move on to the next question.
I'll just add something real quick. So I love what Chandler said about how, you know, we're all humans, and that's so true. And I think sometimes we get so focused on how we're different that we don't remember how we're the same. But I just want to add, you know, it's really easy and really helpful to like have small ways to demonstrate that you're an ally or part of the community yourself. Like, you know, whether it's a pin that you wear on your shirt, or, you know, something like that. It's just creating those visual signals that that you are accepting and inclusive, which I think we can all do regardless of whether or not we personally agree with how someone else is or how someone else lives. That's no reason why we can't be inclusive. So yeah, just those little signals are really important and can go a long way in making someone feel safe and comfortable.
Thank y'all. I noticed some questions in the chat about trainings. There's one question, what cultural competency training for social workers is currently provided in the foster care system? So I don't know if any of y'all are aware of that. and then related training available for those who are not in the field of social work, but who come in contact with youth in the school system or juvenile court setting. So if y'all are aware of any LGBTQ cultural competency trainings, either for social workers or for others who work with youth.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Bethany. I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but I will say that the Trevor Project has a ton of resources on LGBTQ youth and the issues that they face. So that may be a good starting point.
And I was going to add, and I can put the link in the chat. OutCare Health is a national organization. They offer cultural competence trainings. So whether you want to do it as a group, or as an agency, if you just want to log on to one, I'm not sure of the cost associated, but I can drop that link for OutCare Health in there. So that would be a good place for cultural competence trainings. And then the second question about the juvenile justice system, I would say reach out to your local pride centers if they're in your area. So you could just do local pride center for Birmingham, Knoxville, wherever, and see what kind of comes up, see what resources are there. And so going to the pride centers, asking how you can be an ally, asking, hey, this is where I work. Do you have any suggestions there? So those would be the things I would say there.
I'll just add, I know I'm moderating, but not panelist, but as I'm interning at the Magic City Acceptance Center, that is part of what the director and assistant director do, is a lot of cultural competency trainings. So if you're in Alabama, that might be a great resource, the Magic City Acceptance Center. There we go, Amanda just put it in the chat.
I was gonna mention that, Rebecca, so I'm glad you did. Thanks.
Thanks, y'all. Okay, so the next question that I have is, how do I make myself more approachable to people who are LGBTQIA+? And what do I do if someone who is LGBTQIA+ wants to come out in my office or on my residence hall floor or within the context of another group I'm a part of?
I think one thing that Dr. K said that has always been helpful for me as an openly gay person in the South is seeing people that demonstrate in some way that they have an understanding of LGBTQ issues or are accepting of it. So I know when I was in college and in graduate school, certain teachers would have the safe zone stickers on their doors. Some people would wear pins, that would, represent the community in some way. And I think being vocal about your acceptance of the community is huge, because people don't know things unless you let them know. So I know, many years ago, it was very frowned upon if you even supported the LGBTQ community, but I feel like things are slowly evolving, and it's safer for supporters to speak up and open their doors for us.
And to add to that, I would just say, be open and welcoming. I know with COVID, a lot of folks transition to virtual, but as we start to kind of go back in person, I just always say, what does your office space look like? What kind of things are maybe around? So being aware of kind of the space that you even create if you see clients in a direct one-on-one capacity. I'm not saying that you have to take everything down, but I think it's just an awareness of kind of what does that look like upon first impression. If someone walks in and there's a bunch of religious things and they are coming with religious trauma, that could automatically maybe create a barrier to building rapport. And so just being more mindful of the physical spaces that we create when we serve our clients. And then like Dr. K had mentioned, wearing something that maybe indicates you're an ally or things like that, if you're wanting to be more approachable.
And I'll add, one thing that I've started to do more of is to use gender neutral language until I know specifically what pronouns someone uses. So, not assuming pronouns based on someone's name or what they look like. And I think when you meet someone for the first time, it's just a really good way to start is to say, I'm Emma K. I go by pronoun she, they. What's your name? And then that opens that space for that person to feel comfortable giving you their pronouns. And it's a small step that can go a long way and make that person feel comfortable. I think language in general is pretty gendered, and at least, well, actually in most languages are gendered, certainly in English. And just trying to avoid using gendered language, again, until you know how someone identifies is just a good rule of thumb. You can even wear, we have tons of pins where I work that are pronoun pins, which is another way to kind of broach that conversation without even saying anything. You're kind of signaling to that person that you understand the importance of pronouns and you're sharing your pronouns with them. So I think that's one thing that can do a lot of good.
About that,
Sorry,
having pins with your pronouns. That's an awesome idea. I love that.
Am I back? All right.
Exactly.
Cool. Sorry, y'all. Yeah, those are all really great examples. A lot of simple ways to signal that you're a safe person, essentially. And I think you all might notice that a lot of us have included our pronouns in our Zoom names, and a lot of folks are doing that in their email signatures or on their business cards. So just like Dr. K was saying, pronouns, offering your pronouns up front is another really great way to sort of show you're approachable and potentially an ally. Okay, so the last question that I have before we get to the Q&A is, how do I support youth who are LGBTQIA+? So that's a big one. Anybody interested in going first?
Well, I can go first. I've worked with quite a few, LGBTQIA youth, and there's just common themes of being afraid of coming out, being afraid about being accepted, being rejected. A lot of, like I mentioned earlier, religious trauma. So a lot of these youth, have this instilled in their brains that they're bad people and that they're, going to hell because of, who they love and who they identify as. And I think that the best way that we can support those individuals is, really just validating those experiences and normalizing the idea that it's, it's okay for you to feel bad right now, but we're here to help. That's what social workers are here for, and you're not alone. You don't have to be alone. I think a lot of people dismiss those experiences, like, well, it can't be that bad, or suck it up, things get better over time, but that's not what they really want to hear in the moment. They really want to be validated, they want to be cared about, and they want to feel that they have a safe space. And so I think, the best way to support is just to show empathy and compassion and have an awareness of the struggles that they go through on a daily basis.
To add to that, I would say patience. For anyone who's worked with maybe youth or teens, that can maybe be a challenging population in general. And then when you add in an LGBTQ identity, that just adds another layer to things. So patience, I would say listen a lot more. I know sometimes as a therapist, we can want to try to solve things, but like Chandler said, validation is super important. And also learn the terminology. The teams I see teach me all kinds of new things that I'm not aware is a thing. So being aware of that terminology, what that means, to be able to kind of speak with them and open that space for them. And then I would also say knowing what's happening in the local schools, what is happening in the county as it relates to like bathroom bans or things like that, and what that means for the clients that you're working with, being aware of just like legislation, and then just resources, being aware of medical professionals who are safe to send our teens to or our children to. So just an awareness of just resources as well.
There's a question in the chat. Can you give us an example of some of the terminology?
Oh, goodness. So I was talking to actually one of my clients yesterday, and they had used the term QPR. I'm aware of what that means, but if I wasn't, I was like, QPR, like, are we talking about the suicide training? Because that's also that's a training too. But QPR is like a queer platonic relationship, and so we were talking about just different romantic orientations and things of that nature. So that's an example that I had yesterday. That had I not known of the term or been aware of it, I would have maybe been a little confused. And you can always like pop Google real quick, but if you don't know what it is, but that was an example that I actually had happen yesterday in a session.
Thanks, that's helpful. I think another thing that we talk about at the Acceptance Center when we're doing trainings is to sort of mirror language that people are using. And if you're not familiar with the term, to ask them about it. So can you tell me a little bit more about what that means to you? So if it is something that you don't know, because something like queer is a word that means different things to different people. So asking what that means to that person specifically can also be really helpful.
Yeah, and things are also changing and evolving at a very rapid pace. So you may learn, terminology and what all this means, today, and then you may Google it 6 months down the road, and things have changed. So it's not like you can study for this over the weekend and be an expert for the rest of your life. You have to be a lifelong learner because the community is really becoming more complex and more diverse, and a lot of the terms that are used are evolving, or there's things that are being added that aren't currently being used. So I would just really recommend, doing a quick, Google search every few months, or, maybe once a year or twice a year, just to see if there's anything new out there.
Thank you. Dr. K, did you have anything else to add to how to support LGBTQIA+ youth, or do you feel like it got covered?
I feel like it got covered. Plus, I don't have really much experience working with youth, so I thought I'd let the expert speak.
Great. I just wanted to give you an opportunity just in case.
Thank you.
All right, well, that is all of the questions that I have. So we'll go ahead and move on to the Q&A portion. And there are some questions in the chat. Let me scroll through and see what we've got. So the first question we've got, someone says, I would be interested to hear more about the panel's thoughts on the idea that Bethany mentioned, that clinicians who are not supportive of LGBTQ community refer out to other providers. Typically, the response I see when reading online and talking to clinicians in other part of the country is that referring out because you do not agree with the LGBTQ lifestyle is actually discrimination.
Yeah, I can definitely hop in there on that one. And I think in saying that, my point, or the point I was making with that, is we don't want providers who have a bias that maybe they're not willing to put aside or seek their own consultation, supervision, therapy, whatever have you on, because what we don't want to do is be another provider who potentially is causing harm to the community. I can't tell you how many stories I get from clients who are like, my last therapist pretty much tried to like convert me. And so that was maybe an example of them trying to work through their discomfort or whatever have you with that. But I think we sometimes inadvertently do more damage. And I think that's what I mean by, if you know for yourself that for whatever reason you're not able to successfully work with a person without being neutral or anything, then it may be best in those moments to kind of refer out to someone who can give them a better experience.
Yeah, I think, you know, if you do have an issue with a population, you know, whether that be the LGBTQ community or not, you definitely want to receive, you know, supervision or consultation with somebody to work through that, to talk through that. And like Bethany said, if that's not something that you can put aside and provide quality services that you would provide to anyone else, then it is, you know, ethically appropriate to refer to someone else. But, you know, we always want to try and kind of broaden our, you know, our horizons per se. So if it's something that you can work through and learn about, I think that's a great thing. But some people just can't. It's so ingrained in them that they're not able to work through that, and then they do end up doing more harm than good. But I definitely think receiving some type of consultation to try and work through that would be a, you know, excellent first step.
Thank you. I think that's really helpful clarifying there. So another question that we have is, what support is available to social workers when bills are passed that limit our services or require us to do things against our ethics? For example, in Texas, investigating families of transgender youth. Does anyone have any suggestions for supports for social workers?
By supports, are you talking about like who can we go to, or in what capacity do you mean supports? And Texas has been a state that I've watched out of curiosity, because they have passed a couple of legislative bills that do conflict with our code of ethics. And so in terms of support, what are you referring to?
See, I'm not sure.
I'll unmute myself. I'm sorry. That was me. I was not supports, but if it's passed and you're working child welfare and you're told to go investigate this family and it's against your ethics and you're threatened to be fired or anything like that, just what are we doing as an association of social workers to stop these bills, to those kind of things, like, and personally, and and organizationally, I guess, is what I was asking. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say with that, that's on us as social workers to make sure we're out there advocating and it's and being seen. So getting with the NASW or all of our different organizations to really voice discontent with the legislations being passed. Because you're right. I mean, if it's your job and it's totally against our ethics, what do you do there? And so I would really say that we as social workers have to kind of get together to like be united on these issues and like attend, you know, writing letters to legislators or doing the days on the hills or whatever have you. Those are great, but we've got to be consistent with it. We can't do it during social work month and that's it. So I think it's a consistency that we have to do in those instances.
Thanks.
So let's see, I'm trying to make sure I don't miss anything here, but sort of related, when it comes to policy and legislation causing harm to the LGBTQIA+ community, what actions can be taken to help change policies? I think you talked a little bit about us getting out there and advocating, Bethany, but are there any other actions that you guys are aware of?
Well, you know, one thing I'll just kind of, you know, piggyback off that is I feel like in social work education, we emphasize advocacy a lot, but very few social workers actually get out there and advocate. And that's an issue for me, because if we had every single social worker get out there and advocate, put pressure on policymakers, our elected leaders, you know, things like that, you know, we really could enact change. But a lot of people put it on the back burner, and they'll just say, well, I'll advocate by putting something on Twitter or putting something on Facebook, or, you know, if I'm feeling really, really good about it, I'll send a letter to my senator. But, you know, that's something that, you know, we talk about advocacy, but we don't do enough of that, in my personal opinion. And it's not that we lack the training or knowledge in advocacy, it's just, social workers in general just, you know, don't do that as a whole enough. So if we could inspire people to, you know, advocate on, you know, a micro, meso, and macro level, I really do think that, you know, we could help change things.
I would also suggest trying to identify people who are in the this advocacy, the advocacy space. So for instance, I'm actually married to Sydney Duncan, who is a pro bono LGBTQ attorney here at BAO, and pretty much all she does right now is fight against these discriminatory bills against trans, well, pretty much trans children are the latest bills. But so she's a great resource, and people she's affiliated with are great resources. So I think, you know, banding together social workers and, you know, attorneys and other people, I think we can think bigger than just the social worker space, I guess is what I'm getting at. We can also connect with other organizations. I mean, this affects, you know, physicians as well. They're facing these same kind of questions in their practices. So I think the more people from the more disciplines, the better, especially for these state bills, which affect so many people in so many professions.
Any of y'all mind talking a little bit more about some of the recent legislation that's passed, the HB 322 and SB 184, and how that might impact and violate our code of ethics as social workers, for anyone who's maybe not familiar with the legislation.
So I think the bills they tend to be discriminatory in nature. They may not be written as such, but the intention is to discriminate against a group or a set of people when these legislations are passed. And so they kind of impact and can violate our code of ethics. I would say like the social justice component, dignity and worth of a person, things like that, and importance of human relationships, because the community is really struggling, especially in states where this legislation, it just keeps coming. And that impacts how we're able to kind of move about the world. And so, like I said, these legislations, they're worded very cleverly to make it not seem discriminatory, but that, and in fact, is its intention and what it's meant to be, in my opinion.
Thank you so much. I am not seeing any more questions. Let me notice if I missed any.
Get out of it. I had seen one in here about professional liability insurance and providing legal assistance. That'll be dependent on your policy. So make sure whenever you're getting your liability malpractice insurance that you read what's included, because some do include legal representation, legal assistance. So that would be specific to whatever's in your policy.
There's a question in the chat. What are the barriers that social workers conducting LGBTQIA research face?
And there's another question.
And Dr. Emma Kay, if you want to respond to that question, what are some of the barriers that social workers conduct facing LGBTQIA?
So barriers with the research itself. Hi. That's an interesting question. I've never thought about it as a barrier to research. I think about the barriers associated with LGBTQ folks themselves. I guess one thing that comes to mind is, with any kind of quantitative research, you want to make sure that you have a large enough sample to be able to appropriately answer the research questions that you have. And I think, I'm thinking about trans folks specifically as I say this. There's a lot of really good research that we haven't been able to do, this clinical research primarily because we haven't been able to get a sample size that's large enough. So I do a lot of HIV related research, and I draw from this cohort of people with HIV in Alabama, and a very small population of those folks are trans. And so I'm always wanting to conduct research that specifically focuses on on HIV health outcomes among transgender people in Alabama, but there aren't enough people in the sample size. So that's probably not the kind of answer that you were hoping for, although that's something that comes to mind for me. It's not the lack of interest in the topic, it's that there just isn't a big enough sample. But I don't think there are really that many barriers to conducting research itself. If you approach the research, if you approach the population, with respect and all of that, I think with any kind of research that has to do with healthcare disparities, you have to come in with a humility and a willingness to build rapport that can take some time. But, that's how you should approach any research question anyway, that involves a specific population. You should be willing to put in the time on the front end to gain their trust and make sure that you're asking research questions that they actually agree with and that they feel is important. So those are the only barriers that come to mind. I think most of the barriers are experienced by the population themselves and not as much the researchers. Oh, why is the sample
There's a
size
question in the chat.
It's just that there aren't that many transgender people. Again, I'm thinking of a specific cohort and it's in Alabama. Let's say like 100 at most people are transgender. And then if depending on the type of analysis you want to run, you need to have enough power. And then that means that you need, let's say 500 people. And so it's not that you can't do research. There's a lot of great qualitative research you can do. You can do research on descriptives. I just think in terms of some of these really important clinical research questions that we have, we've been limited by the sample size. I don't know if I've answered that. I may be getting too in the weeds with research. But that's just quantitative. Some of the qualitative research I've done over the past years is extremely meaningful, and you don't need a large number. I've learned a lot by asking questions in focus groups to transgender folks. It's just the clinical research side that I'm talking about.
Do you run into barriers with funding relating to research?
Oh, now that's a great question. So yes, that's another thing I struggle with, not with HIV. There's a lot of research dollars for HIV, which I'm glad for. But when you start looking at, say, HIV prevention or health outcomes that aren't HIV related that may affect the LGBTQ population, there aren't as many specific funding sources for those types of research questions. So I would say to you that, the research career that I built so far, which is in terms of the grants I've been awarded, they're almost entirely focused on HIV. That is a big research of mine, but it's not part of that is because that's where the money is. So there definitely needs to be more funding for health outcomes that aren't just related to HIV, but that do relate to the health of LGBTQ folks. Yeah.
And just one more, not quite question, but sort of comment in the chat. I have a lot of parents asking me the best place to look when they have questions about medications, research and the side effects and stuff. So do any of y'all have any idea of where those parents might be able to look to find out more about the medications? I think Peggy put in the chat that resources for parents may be found with PFLAG, and there's a link there.
Yeah, I was going to say PFLAG, Planned Parenthoods, as the providers tend to be very knowledgeable. And if you have an affirming physician, asking them about anything medication related and side effects and things of that nature.
Lauren Jacobs just shared another link in the chat, genderspectrum.org, and Lauren's the assistant director at the Magic City Acceptance Center. So. Okay, well, with that, if there are no more questions, then I'll pass it over to Peggy to talk about the CEUs.
Rebecca, before we turn it over.
Oh, sure.
Yes, and then we can turn it over to Peggy to talk about CEUs. And so just in closing, what could you give attendees, like some takeaways, just like a quick elevator takeaway about best practice or a way that they can provide service to the LGBTQI community? I know you said it and we said a lot, but just in one nutshell, just in closing, Dr. K, Bethany, and Jeffrey, and Chandler, just a quick takeaway that you'll want our attendees to walk away with. Thank you.
I would say, as I said earlier, we're all humans, and I am a lifetime learner, and I advocate for others to be as well, but seek consultation, supervision, training, if you're wanting to do work with this community and provide quality work.
I'll go back to what I said earlier, which is just do what you can to be an ally, do what you can to show that you are an ally. Creating that space of inclusion and affirmation is really important. And again, it's just a very small thing that you can do to help.
Yeah, and like I said earlier, like Bethany said, we're all human, and we should treat each other with kindness and the passion and understanding. And if we do that, then I think we'll be okay.
Thank you all so much. And for the last few minutes here, we'll let Peggy take over and talk about CEUs and close us out.
Great. First, I want to thank everyone for being here today, from Charlie opening up the conversation with their wonderful opening, just sharing lots of relevant information, to Chandler. I'm calling out our students first because I think it's wonderful that we have them represented here. Chandler, Caldwell, and then Rebecca for moderating, and then for Bethany and Dr. Emma Kay. We really appreciate your time and efforts. And again, Sherron Wilkes and Lindsay Johnson, thank you so much for all you do to help the Noontime Knowledge and help us get some information out there. We will resume our Noontime Knowledge series this fall, so we hope you will, follow our social media. If you're on our email list, you'll receive information about our topics for next academic year. So again, thank you for being here. I'm going to compile all this information. I've got quite a list of resources. You should receive your CEU certificate along with a link to program evaluation in email either later today or tomorrow. So again, thank you everybody for being here. The time is right for social workers to work in the LGBTQIA+ communities. Thank you all. Have a great afternoon.